Let's continue Domain 11 Frontier Explorers. Today's story is titled Discovery and Danger on the Prairie. In today's story, we will explore the area of the United States that we now call the Great Plains, which is made up of the land formerly known as the Louisiana Purchase. In this area, today you will find such states as Colorado, Kansas, parts of Montana, Nebraska, North Dakota, Oklahoma, South Dakota, and a little bit of Texas all fit into this areas of land. So far, we already have established that Lewis and Clark are looking for an all-waterway to the Pacific Ocean on the west coast, and that they've started their journey here in St. Louis, where the Mississippi River and the Missouri River meet. Let's see which of the tasks that President Jefferson set out for them that they will accomplish today. On July 19, 1804, William Clark found himself at the edge of an ocean. It was not the Pacific Ocean, the vast sea to the west that Clark and his friends hoped to reach. In fact, it was not an ocean of water at all. It was a large, flat area of land covered in grass called a prairie. A prairie goes on as far as the eye can see, just like the ocean. Do you remember when we learned about the grasslands in the savanna? It's quite similar in the amount of grass you would see, only it's not nearly as tall. Clark was out hunting for the expedition and spotted some elk tracks, which he followed up a hill. He later described what he found at the top. I came suddenly into an open and boundless prairie. I could not see the edges in any direction. This was so sudden and entertaining that I forgot the elk I had been following. Clark had reached the eastern edge of what today we call the Great Plains. Wild grass as high as Clark's knees stretched out and blew gently in the wind, interrupted every so often by a hill or a grove of trees. That sea of grass stretched all the way to the distant Rocky Mountains, which it would take the Corps of Discovery weeks more to reach. During those weeks, the explorers saw many plants and animals new to them. Meriwether Lewis was especially fascinated by the pronghorn antelope, called pronghorns for short. He tried to get close enough to draw pictures of them, but the pronghorns always ran away. Pronghorns have incredibly sharp eyesight and a strong sense of smell to warn them of approaching danger. When Lewis finally came close to a pronghorn and got a good look at the long curved horns that gave the animal its name, he wrote, "The speed of this animal is equal, if not superior, to that of the finest racing horse. The pronghorn is my favorite of all the animals we have encountered so far." The explorers were also astonished by the prairie dog, a tiny rodent. These little creatures, related to squirrels, lived together by the thousands in what the men seemed to call prairie dog towns. The prairie dog towns consisted of underground tunnels that sometimes stretched out for miles across the flat plains. "We have to catch one of these to send back to President Jefferson," William Clark declared. But catching a prairie dog was not so easy. One prairie dog standing guard above its hole in the ground saw the men coming and chirped a high-pitched warning. Instantly, all the creatures dived down into the ground. The men dug down after them, but found the tunnels went down more than 6 feet below the surface, spreading out in all directions, with emergency exits to escape their many predators, hawks, coyotes, and snakes, all of whom consider prairie dogs to be delicious snacks. Clark wrote down their findings about the prairie dog and pronghorn antelope in his journals. Still following the Missouri River across the prairie, the expedition moved on. Soon they began to meet new tribes of Native Americans. Most were friendly and welcoming, especially one tribe called the Yankton Sioux. A few of the Yanktons guided the travelers for a few days, but then said, "You're coming to the land of the Teton Sioux. We will not be able to guide you any longer." Lewis and Clark had already heard about the Teton Sioux. President Jefferson wanted them to become friends with the Teton Sioux. However, the Teton Sioux were not interested in trade with the settlers and did not want to allow Lewis and Clark on their land. I mean, could you blame them? One September afternoon, John Colter, one of the expedition's best hunters, was following the tracks of an animal. Colter dismounted from his horse to look more closely. Some Teton Sioux, hiding among the nearby trees on their own horses, shouted and rushed forward, riding off with Colter's horse. Colter walked back to the river and reported to Lewis and Clark what had happened. Minutes later, 5 Teton Sioux appeared on the shore, calling out to talk to Lewis and Clark. Captain Clark answered, "We will not speak with you until our horses return." Minutes later, more than 200 Teton warriors, all armed with bows and arrows, rode out from the trees and spread out along the riverbank. Captain Lewis remembered that President Jefferson wanted them to be friends with the Teton Sioux. He quietly ordered, "Stop the boats and hold them steady. We're in the middle of the river." Clark, smiling, called, "We come as friends from our great chief." The chief that Clark was talking about was President Jefferson. "We invite your chiefs to come and see our great boat." Clark ordered a few sailors to row them to shore in a pirogue, and after greeting the 3 main chiefs, Clark brought 2 of them aboard the keelboat. There, he and Lewis were friendly to the Teton Sioux and gave them gifts. Then Clark and the oarsmen took the chiefs back to the shore. Meanwhile, Captain Lewis stood ready on the keelboat's bow, and his soldiers kept rifles in their hands or immediately by their sides in case of trouble. Everything seemed to be going well until suddenly one chief shouted, "Your gifts are not good enough. You may not return to your big boat until you give us better gifts." Sioux warriors grabbed the pirogue's rope and held it securely. Clark knew that the Teton Sioux honored courage. If he showed any signs of weakness at this moment, the Tetons might attack. Even if there was no fight, any chance of a strong friendship with the Tetons could disappear. Clark whipped his sword out and, holding it high, firmly demanded, "Release our boat at once!" Back on the keelboat, Lewis ordered his men, "Prepare arms! Only on my order may you fire, and not a second before." Instantly the soldiers raised their rifles. In answer, the Tetons raised their bows and sets of arrows, ready to shoot at the core of Discovery. No one moved. The silence stretched out for a long, tense moment. Then a Sioux chief told the warriors holding the rope, "Let go." They obeyed. Clark told his oarsmen, "Return to the keelboat." One of the men asked quietly, "Without you, sir?" "I gave you an order," Clark said in a voice that sounded much calmer than he actually felt. As the pirogue pushed off from the riverbank, Teton warriors surrounded Clark. Lewis could see only his friend's hat over the shoulders of the Sioux. Lewis gave orders, and as the pirogue reached the keelboat, a number of armed soldiers got into the pirogue and started back for Clark. But then suddenly, the Tetons moved away from Clark. Clark's bravery had impressed the Tetons. The Tetons thought that Clark was brave because he stood up to them. They smiled in friendship and invited the members of the expedition to their village. The explorers accepted the invitation. The Corps of Discovery had survived a dangerous situation. What they did not know was that even greater dangers and even greater victories still lay ahead for us to discover a different day.